Hello and welcome to This Week in the 904. I'm John Bachman. After more than a 3-week pause in legislative business, the U.S. House of Representatives finally has a new speaker. But it took several votes to get there. Numerous news reports showed how chaotic it was behind the scenes, begging the question, is the Republican Party more splintered than ever? We asked today's guest, Congressman John Rutherford, to take us behind the scenes and talk about what led up to the final vote. But first, let's take a closer look at the new Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson.
And why was that?
I'm doing my visit with the president.
After a bipartisan meeting with President Biden on additional spending requests for the wars in Israel and Ukraine, newly elected Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, faces a series of critical legislative priorities in a bitterly divided chamber.
There is zero reason to ever shut down the government.
With that deadline to avert a government shutdown just weeks away, Johnson must make up for lost time after a more than 3-week Speaker vacancy.
You're going to see an aggressive schedule in the days and weeks ahead. You're going to see Congress working as hard as it's ever worked.
The new House Speaker also faces an uphill battle to bring both parties to the negotiating table.
Like it or not, Speaker Johnson will not be able to ignore the need for bipartisanship in divided government.
This, as Speaker Johnson, a staunch conservative, faces scrutiny on his efforts to overturn the 2020 election and views on abortion.
There is no right to abortion in the Constitution, period.
Do you believe the 2020 election was stolen, sir? Just yes or no?
Despite positions where they disagree, moderate Republicans say that they believe Johnson will fulfill his role and make an efficient Speaker. For an inside look at the vote for Speaker, we talk with Congressman John Rutherford.
Joining me today is Congressman John Rutherford. Congressman, thank you very much for being here.
Good to be with you, John.
Yeah. We have a lot to cover. We want to let's start with the Speaker situation that just wrapped up recently. You voted for the current Speaker, Mike Johnson. What was it behind the scenes for you? Because, you know, everybody was changing votes. There were a bunch of different names out there, different people even running and then not getting elected. What was that like leading up behind the scenes for those of us who were watching?
Well, here's what happened, and I think the reason we had to go through multiple candidates before we could get to what I always suspected would be our consensus candidate. I talked about a consensus candidate for quite a while leading up to that. But here's what happened. After McCarthy was taken out by Matt Gaetz and 7 other Republicans who were working in lockstep with 210 Democrats to take him out, unjustifiably, I think, and that's a much longer conversation.
Well, I'm going to follow up with that.
On the Speaker's race, after that, Jim Jordan and Steve Scalise had a head-to-head free and fair election in conference, which is an anonymous vote by all of the Republicans. Steve Scalise won that race. Jim Jordan was not willing to accept the outcome of that election, and really in his concession speech got up and just kneecapped Steve Scalise. Now, he apologized for it later, but the damage was already done. And I told him in the meeting that we had, that 13 of us had with Jim later, I said, look, I'm glad you apologized. I said, but now this is about accountability. The damage was done. You did nothing to fix the damage. And so what he did was he basically refused to follow the majority. Then the agreement was we were only going to go to the House floor for a vote if somebody had 217 votes. Steve couldn't get the 217 because of what Jim had done. So Steve came in the next afternoon, as you remember, and said, look, I withdraw. I can't get the 217.
Yeah.
So then what happens? Jim Jordan runs against Austin Scott. He loses 90 votes in that, almost 90 votes in that election. And what's he do? He goes to the floor with less than 217. So there's another agreement that he violated. And so I was not going to reward that kind of failed leadership with a speaker's gavel. Wasn't going to do it. And so I voted for Steve Scalise in each of those rounds because he won the election. And of course then after Jim Jordan started the pressure campaign against all of us, you know, poor Don Bacon and his wife out in Nebraska, they had death threats and all kinds of stuff. It was horrific, John. I've never seen anything like it.
Did it do permanent damage? And by permanent, I mean, you know, for the next election or so to the Republican Party, in your opinion?
Well, I will be surprised if it doesn't have some residual effect on 2024. I fear it will. Now, a year is a long time, so, you know, we may be able to, and depending on how well Mike Johnson does now, everybody, Mike Johnson, he was a classmate of mine, by the way. We came in on the 115th together, the 115th Congress, and I knew then that he was intelligent. You know, he's a constitutional lawyer. He's intelligent, well-spoken, communicates brilliantly. But what I like most about Mike, and I think the others do as well, is this guy really lives his faith in the marketplace. And so he, over the years, and he was, now a lot of people don't know this because who knows who the, you know, the vice chairman of the Republican conference is, right? But nobody.
Yeah, don't put me on the spot. I don't.
But that's where Mike was.
Okay.
And so he was already on the leadership team. It was just a lower level, you know, kind of out of view. Mm-hmm. And he is such a humble guy.
So this isn't quite as out of left field as maybe some might think.
No,
right?
not at all.
Right.
Not for the conference. Yeah. We all knew Mike well, yeah. and I knew that Mike had the trust and respect of the entire conference, and that came through when he got a unanimous vote on the floor.
So one last question on Johnson, then I want to get into some other ongoing current events, and that is, you know, he did not want to certify the 2020 election, considered a staunch conservative, and, you know, there's obviously been a divide to get a speaker in. How will that impact his leadership, and will both sides come to the table in good faith with all this?
Well, look, the way people describe what he did with the 2020 election in trying to overturn an election, or that's not what he was doing. He wrote an amicus brief for the Texas case that was going to the U.S. Supreme Court. I got on that brief with him. There were 147 Republicans that joined in that amicus brief supporting that challenge by Texas going to the Supreme Court. And here's all we said. And this is the part that is so difficult to get out. It's not about overturning the election. It's about holding 6 states accountable for having unconstitutionally changed their election laws. If you read Section 2, Article 1, Section 2 of the Constitution, the only people that can change election laws is your state legislature, not your governor, not your Secretary of State. And heck, in Wisconsin, they even had a judge change the law. You cannot do that constitutionally.
President Biden wants $106 billion for aid to Ukraine and Israel. Coming up, we ask our guest if he plans to vote for it when This Week in the 904 continues.
This Week in the 904.
We cannot allow the brutality and the just unspeakable evil that is happening against Israel right now to continue. We're going to stand with our friends.
New House Speaker Mike Johnson says he thinks a standalone Israel aid package will pass in the lower chamber. We get an inside view from our guest, Congressman John Rutherford.
The president wants $106 billion for aid for Ukraine and Israel. You're on the Appropriations Committee.
Right.
Are you going to give it? And what are your, well, let's start there. Are you going to give that $106 billion for both of those as a package?
Speaker Johnson has already said he wants to separate those out. I want to separate that whole package of items. For example, the immigration money. Look, our problem at the southern border is not dollars. Our problem with the southern border is policy. Change the policy. You don't need more dollars. If you would enforce the correct policy, we wouldn't need any dollars down there, any additional dollars down there. And so that's one thing that I'm in disagreement on, the $106 billion package. Now, I do agree that each of this is kind of like an omnibus, you know, and I don't like omnibus bills, because then you have to vote for something you don't like this extra money for immigration that I don't think they need or deserve. And to get what you want, you got to take the bad with the good. well, I'm not willing to do that, so I think Speaker Johnson's made the right decision here. We're going to separate these out. The Ukraine and the Israel supplementals can stand on their own, and I think they can both stand on their own separately.
Think Democrats will pass it for them individually? We'll take the Republicans off the table for a minute.
I think so.
Okay. And so let's talk about Israel, Ukraine as well, but specifically Israel. We have a large number of Mayport-based personnel, ships and personnel there.
USS Carney.
Carney, we've talked to you about that,
right.
Heroic efforts there. But what are your thoughts on Israel and what we're doing over there and what needs to be done?
Yeah. Well, look, we have to stand beside our partner, Israel. They're our closest ally and the only democracy in the region. But I also want to point this out. Yeah, we have a very large Palestinian constituency here in Jacksonville. And they are good people. They don't like Hamas any more than we do, everybody. And so, you know, the tragedy is those Palestinian lives in Gaza who don't support Hamas either. I mean, they're occupied by Hamas. It's not their will that they be under that. And so a lot of innocent people are going to die, but it's the fault of Hamas, not Israel. And I try to make that distinction that, you know, Israel was attacked, viciously attacked. Civilians were just slaughtered. I mean, the horrible things you hear, beheadings, babies being burned, you know, all these things that we never thought after the Holocaust we would ever hear again. Well, here it is. And so we've got to stand with Israel. I understand Netanyahu's desire to weed out Hamas, pull them out by the roots. But in that process, I'm afraid that you know, good Palestinian lives are going to be lost, and so are good Israeli lives.
Is there concern that this? I mean, we've already started to see hints of it with other groups being pulled in, if you will, or jumping in, or however you want to describe it, and the fact that this conflict, this war, could grow into something much greater that the U.S. then finds. I mean, what is your take on that, and where are we going, and how do we keep from getting too far in this, and how to stop it?
John, that's why I think events like we just held yesterday on the front steps of City Hall are so important, because our enemies over there, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, they need to know that we are standing solid behind Israel. We're going to be there. We've got 2 carrier groups that have already moved over there. The Carney's done their great work already. They need to know that you mess with Israel, you're messing with us.
That strength, you say, then, would be the way to kind of deter this thing from growing and spreading.
Still ahead, we continue our conversation with Congressman John Rutherford on Ukraine and the budget when This Week in the 904 continues.
But in order to make a law, it has to pass both bodies and be signed by the president. My own view, I just expressed, is that we need to treat all 4 of these areas. All 4 of them: Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan, and the border.
Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell responds to the Speaker's standalone Israel aid package that excludes Ukraine. We ask our guest, Congressman John Rutherford, about his support of Ukraine.
Ukraine, thoughts on that? Because you did mention you want to separate that. Does that mean you're not in favor of giving Ukraine more funding?
No, I fully support Ukraine, and here's why. A couple reasons. Number one, the 94 Budapest Agreement, when the Soviet Union fell and we convinced Ukraine to give up their nuclear weapons that were in their country, and they agreed because we promised that we would protect their sovereignty. They've now been attacked by Russia, who also agreed to give them their sovereignty, and we've got to hold the line on that. Now, my argument with people is they're not NATO, but Poland, all of the other Balkan states are, and so what's going to happen? Because I think it was a little over 2 years ago now, Putin gave that 2-hour diatribe on, reconstituting the Soviet Union. When he says it, I believe it. I think he's going to try to do that. So what's going to happen is he's not going to stop at Ukraine. Now, we can either fight Russia in Ukraine using U.S. dollars and Ukrainian blood, or we can fight him in Poland using U.S. dollars and American blood. Now, I also believe we have to put good, I don't want to be giving humanitarian aid as much as the military assistance. I think this administration has really just made numerous mistakes along the way. Pulling all of our ships out of the Black Sea, for example, because of that 36 agreement. Those kind of things, those are just bad decisions by our Department of Defense. And so, but we have to, and this idea that whatever it takes for however long it takes, that's not a good answer. I want to know how we're going to win, what is a win. And I can tell you, John, when I was in Poland, I met with myself and a delegation. We met with 6 of their parliamentarians from Ukraine. And that question was asked, what is victory for you all? And they said, Russia has to leave Ukraine. And I asked, does that include Crimea? And they're like, absolutely. So it's very clear to me what the end game has to be for them. But what I want to hear from President Biden and from President Zelensky is, how do you intend to get there?
And how much is that going to cost, right?
Right. Well, yeah. How do you get there? Right. And then what's the cost of that going to be? Right. And we need to have, we need to quit funding their government. We don't need to fund their government. And we need NATO and the European Union to step up. They can be carrying a much bigger burden on this than they are. It's their backyard. So I think those are the couple things that we really need. We need a plan. We need a cost of that plan. We need NATO and the EU to step up, and we need guardrails on the humanitarian dollars that we do give to Ukraine and others in the area to make sure that we are protecting America's investments.
I want to ask about the budget, because that's got to happen by November 17th, or we're going to face the threat of another shutdown, which we seem to be kind of dealing with every several months. Is it going to happen? Are we going to be able to get some kind of a budget agreement? Or are we looking at a continuing resolution, which we've kind of kicked the can down the road for how many months?
I will tell you, John, I think we may need to do another short-term, maybe 2 or 3 weeks CR. But as I showed you, we have, 4 bills now, because energy and water just passed. We've got 4 bills that have already passed, single standalone appropriation bills. And they
passed into committee, or passed out of committee?
They passed out of committee and passed on the floor. 4 of them have passed on the floor.
Okay.
The remaining 8 are, 6 of them are ready to go to the floor, just need a rules package. 2 that haven't been marked up yet, so they haven't been through the amendment process in subcommittee. There's talk about taking them straight to rules and then to the floor, and we can do the debate on the floor, and everybody will still get their amendments heard, but it'll be on the floor instead of in subcommittee, and that would probably save us, 3 or 4 days.
So you're saying if we get a continuing resolution for a couple weeks that gives everybody a chance to iron these out, you think we can actually pass a budget that would be passed perhaps by the end of November?
I do. Because now the hard part's going to be once we pass all 12 of them and they go to the Senate, and then they got to go to conference, and we got to hammer that out.
I mean, you got Democrats controlling the Senate. You think that you can get something that everybody can agree on?
Yeah, I think, look, I do. I do. I mean, they understand we've got to settle on a budget, and that's our process.
This might be too big of a question to throw at you at the last second here, but what do you think is going to be the biggest hanging point? What's the biggest disagreement?
Well, I think one of the biggest hanging points is going to be agriculture, which is the bill that already failed on the floor, and we're going to have to do some tweaks to that. the Democrats, that and food stamps and SNAP and all of that is
right
in that bill.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's not so much the farmer side of it as it is the program side of it.
Yeah, yeah. We'll keep an eye on it.
Yeah.
Congressman, I appreciate your time. I think we are going to be done here, and I really appreciate you coming by and talking with us.
Thank you, John.
It was a pleasure to pick your brain. Thank you.
Thanks for watching This Week in the 904.